want to make sure everyone's awake because we are going to discuss a little bit of light biochemistry during my talk here. So I've got a few updates I want to provide, mainly around kochia and water hemp. Now, past couple of years, you've probably seen this video, and I want to present it once again. A, for entertainment value. B, it's always fun to make sure everyone's awake. And of course, the sound is off. The sound was working earlier today. So the main thing is, this is a news clip from Fargo in the fall of 2023, and she did happen to call it kochia. So a newscaster sees a word they haven't seen before come up on the teleprompter, and she kind of got it wrong. But the other part I wanted to point out is she was actually Karnak the Magnificent, for all you Johnny Carson fans out there, because she did mention it's only getting worse. So this was the fall of 2023. There's my kochia pet. So we talked a lot about group 14 resistant kochia throughout the course of the day today, and we've kind of been tracking this on the map. So 2023, at that point in time, we were doing greenhouse work. We didn't know what caused the resistance. We didn't have a genetic test available that Zach could help us out with. So this was really the blood, sweat, and tears of Brian and his group that were able to find out we had this resistance grown in a few counties. I'll be honest, this is probably the last update of the map I'm going to make. So this is a compilation of what Zach has compiled from the Genotyping Center and some additional greenhouse work we've conducted. So it's the last one I'm probably going to make because you can fill in basically all the white counties. We just haven't gotten the right sample. So we know we have group 14 resistance widespread across the state. I'm going to show how much more widespread it is geographically across the region, though. So work very closely with Dr. Charles Geddes. He's with the AAFC, basically Canada's USDA, more or less. And we worked together to find and confirm group 14 resistant kochia. This past year, he got his own leaf assay up and running and asked for submissions. And basically, all those municipalities in red were added to the map in Canada this past year. So this was the first year they had the test available, and they basically lit up the Canadian prairies, showing that we have group 14 resistance in all 3 provinces. Just kind of a blown up cartoon showing all the different municipalities where we do have group 14 resistant kochia. The 2 blue municipalities, one in Saskatchewan, one in Alberta, were confirmations over the 2021 to 2023 timeframe, seed collected, kind of the old-fashioned way of confirming. So they went from 2 municipalities with confirmation to, I kind of say this map is like mine. We can fill in all those barrier areas in between, more than likely. Don't have a map of Montana, but it's widespread in Montana. Talking to folks in South Dakota, kind of a similar thing. And just those slides were from Charles, so I put his acknowledgement slide in here. So he's got a full team up there that's doing quite a lot of exciting work with this. So that's kind of the samples you send to us. Or if you're in Canada, you send to Charles. This past year, Charlie Lim from my team drove around, spent a lot of time on the road around harvest. And actually, one of the agents brought him some kochia and was just laughing. The Explorer that Charlie was driving around was absolutely packed full with Menards lawn bags of all the kochia we were selecting. Our goal was 100 samples. We did get there. I call this a semi-random sampling. So Charlie would drive around, stop. There's some kochia I'm going to collect it. No history of the field. But we did have some samples from some folks in this room and some of our county agents. So we've been making our way through these since about Christmas time. The first 60 we have completed. So out of the first 60 samples, a general summary, 35 out of 60 were group 14 resistant. 60 out of 60 were glyphosate resistant. That actually shocked me. I thought we'd find one we could kill with glyphosate. Wasn't the case. And for dicamba, we used the half-pound rate we can use in soybean. Jason mentioned he's kind of feeling maybe it's on the down slope of its life in some geographies. We had about 12 out of 60 samples where we had some survivors at that half-pound rate. So we sprayed the next group of 40 last week. So the only early indicator I have is group 14 resistance. 14 out of 33. So I want to point out, group 14, basically this semi-random sampling, 53% of the kochia populations are coming back resistant. So to me, that's pretty alarming. It's one thing to light up a county. It's another thing to drive around, grab some kochia, and we can't control it with saflufenicil and some other group 14s anymore. Just quick reminder, I think most folks here have seen this slide before. When we talk about group 14 resistance, I want to focus on the back row of this Sharpen, Reviton, Vita, and AIM. So this back four right there are some of our burn down products that we use either prior to planting, or some of these we're going to use in the pre-harvest time frame. Now, I promised you some light biochemistry. So we have worked pretty closely with BASF, a lot of the team over in Germany, to figure out what's going on with these populations. So they're the ones that found its target site mutation that allowed folks like Zach to develop this assay to quickly test for resistance. So they actually found why we're getting resistance. So this is kind of the make sure you're awake part of the talk here. So what we're looking at here is one part of the PPO complex. And what we're basically showing, all these different dashed lines, that's different binding sites or binding affinity sites for a group 14 herbicide within that enzyme. I think I counted earlier with Dr. Howe, there's 9 different places where something like saflofinicil can bind within this pocket. What they found is this aromatic ring, this phenylalanine, is at the 454 location. That's just important for us so we can go and find it. Zach can find it with the probes, knows where it's at. So that's the amino acid that's there in the wild type populations. What we're seeing here on the screen is just these other cartoons. There's the 3 different group 14s we've tested: saflofinicil or Sharpen, AIM, which is carfentrazone, and then famecivin, which is one of our diphenyl ethers. So what this team was actually able to go in and find and describe in great detail in a paper that we just submitted, and you can find it online. It will be officially published here, hopefully in the coming weeks or months. This is an important concept for our binding site. So we talk about a lock and key. It can bind to there, and then we can get resistance. So in the wild type, when we can kill kochia with these group 14s, this aromatic ring that's within the enzyme, there's saflofinicil. So it's got this ring with a couple nitrogens, couple oxygens coming off of it. That's called pi-pi stacking there. That's basically where saflofinicil can bind, non-covalent bond. Holy crap, I didn't lose anyone yet. All right. One more here. So there's 3 different amino acid substitutions, and all of them are there on the bottom part of the screen. They don't have that aromatic ring. This then prevents something like saflofinicil from having that pi-pi stacking there, and that's where we get resistance. So I think it's pretty neat, and there's a couple of folks in the room here that kind of find this stuff interesting. Dr. Howard is ready to talk about this to the students later this semester, because it's pretty neat and unique, new, all of the above when we talk about group 14 resistance, because unfortunately we are kind of the global leaders of group 14 resistant kochia, us and our neighbors up in Canada. So where does this come into play with other group 14? So I just kind of look at the different molecules now. I've spent way too much time looking at how different products are assembled. So I showed that back row in the slide with pictures. Here's saflofinicil. There's that aromatic ring, and then it goes into this benzene ring with fluorine and chlorine. Tiafenicil, that's Reviton. You see that same structure there. So some of these acils that we have in the marketplace, same structure, so it's the same mechanism of resistance. We've kind of shown flumioxazin has some issues in some of these populations. It's not quite the same structure, but we have a bunch of these rings going on. So a company with a lot more resources can probably sit through and model which of these will or will not work. Now that we kind of know the mechanism of resistance, we're just kind of showing some of the whys behind the scene there. Figure this workshop is one of these opportunities to delve a little bit deeper into some of the resistance. And I'll skip through this for time. So the rest of my talk, I'm going to shift gears and focus on water. So I just want to give that kochia update and then talk about some of the mechanisms of resistance. So water hemp. Again, I like maps. They're kind of fun, nice visual aids. If your county is green, we found at least one population of water hemp. This map gets a little bit greener every year. We don't really have any in the western tier of counties, but I can tell you, get out here into parts of Montana, there's at least 2 counties on the border that have water hemp. I believe both situations are under a pivot, so where they can add on some water, they're getting some water hemp out there. I'd like to go into some history. So the year 2000 was the last year we had a statewide survey looking at weed escapes in all the fields across the state. led by my predecessor, Dr. Zollinger. In 2000, we found 5 counties that had water hemp. Important part is the bottom of the slide here. Basically, 0.25% of fields across the whole state had water hemp, compared to just the other pigweed species, redwood pigweed, pal amaranth. That was about 25% of the fields. So fast forward 26 years, it's probably, I won't say 100%, but you look at Richland County, Cass County, a lot of our fields, it's the number 1 weed. So it's kind of showing how quickly things can change within 25 years. Jason just told you how quickly things can change within 2 years. And water hemp is just this weed that's continuing to proliferate. Here's our North Dakota kind of version of this. Go anywhere else in the Corn Belt, talk to some colleagues up in Manitoba, same thing's happening north of the border. We talk a lot about Palmer, it gets all the big headlines. Water hemp is the thing that we have to deal with primarily as far as pigweeds are concerned. Now, we oftentimes think about water hemp, that's a corn issue, that's a soybean issue, that's a sugar beet issue. If we have crops that grow fast and get a canopy, we've had some success in the past. Sunflower, we have our one chance at our planting time frame, get the residual herbicide on a year like 2025 when we just continue to rain. Eventually that residual runs out of steam, and we did see too many fields look like this in the fall. Guess I took it out. I had a picture of small grains. So this has kind of shifted in a lot of the area here in the southern part of the valley where water hemp is quickly becoming one of our top issues in small grain. And Dr. Howitt kind of led through some of his research out of his group for how we can actually control it in small grain a little bit better. But I just want to focus a little bit more on resistance. So here's group 14 resistance. Again, a nice little map. All the white counties in between the gold ones, we could probably fill those in with the right population. So we can find group 14 resistance within the eastern third, eastern half of the state. Dr. Hager took a good amount of time to walk through what that looks like with regards to group 14s and soybean. A couple years ago, we did find one population with dicamba resistance. So the gold box there in the middle, that's a 0.5 pound per acre. That's our soybean rate. The resistant population is on the top. And we even applied 1 to 2 pounds of dicamba and still got seed production. So we can apply some pasture rates of dicamba, still have a population like this survive. Now, how do you get something like this? This was 3 applications per year of glyphosate and dicamba for, I think, 5 straight years. So a worst case of, unless you wanted to get resistance, but again, within a 4 to 5 year window, that's how things can change. So now dicamba is not effective on that population. What we haven't done, and I'm going to place all the failures on my shoulders on this one, is really take a close look at corn herbicides in our geography. Over in Minnesota, my colleague there, Devlin, he went through a couple years ago, had a student survey a good portion of the state and look at really, I think it was 6 or 7 or 8 different active ingredients. But I picked out atrazine and mesotrione to show what he found. I think this was about 3 years ago, Tom, if I remember right, when we were collecting seed. The greener an area on the map, the more susceptibility you have, or basically lack of resistance. So getting up in the northwest parts of Minnesota, at that point in time, he was not really finding atrazine resistance. Kind of a really embedded issue in southern Minnesota. Mesotrione, group 27, trade name of Callisto. One little pocket in the northwest corner. Otherwise, he kind of viewed it as, yeah, that's a southern Minnesota issue, but certainly we have found some in the region. Now, this past year, we have started looking, or this winter, we have started looking at some of our corn herbicides for resistance. So several populations collected from Barnes, Cass, and Sargent County. And I was just looking at these, the final evaluation just yesterday in the greenhouse. What we found is that out of these 18 populations, 60% of plants that we tested within populations were resistant to atrazine. We used a 0.5 pound and 1.5 pound rate as some discriminating doses. Rate didn't matter. It either survived or it didn't. Dr. Hager talked a lot about atrazine resistance. Metribuzin still controls these, which if you remember back to his talk from this morning, we're looking at metabolic resistance within water hemp to atrazine. Mesotrione, 15% of all those plants tested out of the 18 populations. We looked at 3 and 9 fluid ounces of Callisto. Rate kind of mattered. We have some populations that survived 9 ounces of Callisto, barely even flashed. But more of the survivors were that 3 ounce rate. 2,4-D, I'd say 3 weeks ago today, I would have told you I don't really have much concern. That's a better growth regulator in our trials for controlling water hemp compared to dicamba. We do have one population from Cass County where 6 out of the 16 plants that were sprayed this first go around survived. We will bring this forward to an official dose response to officially use the R word if it continues to play out like that. And we had plants survive 1 and 3 quarts of Enlist. So we'll do a rounding error, 1 and 3 pounds of dicamba. If I compare that to the other 17 populations, that 1 quart of Enlist per acre, plants were dead, complete sticks within 4 to 5 days. So just kind of showing the level of sensitivity of most of our populations compared to this one that we've looked at. A little bit of picture form here, left to right, we've got 0, half a pound, and 1.5 pounds of atrazine. Susceptible populations, we were killing every single plant at a half pound. Mesotrione, I said some populations we could spray 9 fluid ounces and barely flash it. That's what a survivor looks like there on the right side of that screen. So mesotrione. Just a couple pictures of that 2,4-D application. So one, and actually the middle column is 1 quart of Enlist, and the right column is 3 quarts of Enlist per acre. Just kind of showing all the different plants that were tested. Susceptible population on the right. Just a little bit different angle showing how dead the plants were. Susceptible population up front. That little 404 sticker in front, that was basically looks the same at 5 days after application compared to yesterday, which was 20 days. Compared to populations or plants in the back that are surviving, actively growing, and are setting seed. Just a different look at that. Okay, apparently I had one more look at that. That's enough of the 2,4-D thing. Now, as far as how fast things can change, this is where I wanted to mention some of what we've found in our research site here near campus. So 2021, so we've actually had this water hemp site going back to at least 2018. 2021, we had a pretty big seed collection. This is still my susceptible check that we utilize within our testing program. We did not have any resistance to atrazine in 2021. Over the next 4 years, we had a grand total of 2 corn trials at this site, which were mixtures of atrazine and group 27s, a lot of complex tank mixtures in corn, and we basically had complete water hemp control within those plots. I will mention that we do have some corn around us that always has water hemp in it, so maybe there's some selection pressure, some things drifting on pollen. But essentially from 2021, with no resistance to 2025, that's what a pound of atrazine does for us at this research site. So this was a pound of atrazine applied pre-emergence. So a 4-year window with close to 0 selection pressure within our plots, and now we have atrazine resistance, and it's metabolic atrazine resistance. So again, showing how fast things can kind of evolve within the water hemp world. To the point that actually sometime in late June, I called up one of the chemical reps and said, I don't want to be accusatory, but is this a good sample of atrazine? So, all right, before we actually make any accusations, let's go spray it on soybean. So left picture is July 11th, which was about 7 days after we applied atrazine over the top, 1 pound of atrazine. Water hemp is there. We did kill our soybeans. A couple weeks later, water hemp is completely regrown and overtaken, and the soybeans are dead. So it was a good sample of product. We're just getting a lot of survivors at 1 pound without that selection pressure. A couple research slides here, or a couple data sets for corn, water hemp in corn. So I want to show this concept of using metribuzin in corn. Dr. Hager kind of showed the utility of metribuzin. I do have to point out, this is not labeled in North Dakota. But we have folks from Minnesota, we have folks from South Dakota. So my colleague down in South Dakota wanted to look at metribuzin in corn. So seeing if we can utilize that product in corn for water hemp control, and then look at the injury risk within corn. So the label is on the right side of the screen, the rates that we can use in Minnesota and or South Dakota. Just going to reemphasize once again, not labeled where I'm standing right now. So we did a little bit of rate titration. So starting at 2 fluid ounces of metribuzin, and we went up all the way to 12 fluid ounces. So this was a liquid metribuzin. This 8-ounce rate, that's the South Dakota rate, 6 is the Minnesota rate, as far as what we can use maximum within corn. And at those labeled rates, well, between about 55 to 80% control. Similar to what Dr. Hager was showing, we have this cutoff where we start to see more control with these higher rates of metribuzin. By comparison, here's half a pound and here's a pound of atrazine. So it wasn't zero, but 20% is basically zero if you don't have a check to run off of. And then a new product from UPL on the right, just by comparison, one that's not labeled within North Dakota, so I'm not really going to discuss it. But just kind of showing the results we were seeing for water hemp control. A couple pictures. So actually, this is one of these neat things where if you get a bare spot in the field, the check actually looks worse, or looks better, I should say, the 1 pound of atrazine. And that's just really kind of the pressure there, but showing, again, that 1 pound of atrazine not doing a whole lot compared to there's a 1/4 pound active of metribuzin on the left. Looks pretty clean, but we do have a lot of very small cotyledon to 2-leaf water hemp in this plot, and this was sprayed the same day with glufosinate to clean up any of the escapes. Showing picture form, and there's that 1 pound rate again. So did we see injury? Across 8 different states, we did not see injury on corn at any rate of metribuzin tested. Now, am I going to sit here and advocate we need to use metribuzin in corn? I don't think so. We've got other options in corn. I would like to save metribuzin for the broadleaf crop acre, but just showing how effective it can be and not getting that injury in corn. Last trial I wanted to show. So this is a trial that we've had a number of years here of several different Bayer programs in here. I know Brian's had this on Kochia and Foxtail out in Minot. So it's kind of looking at either pre followed by post programs or a total post program. So what I like to focus on, just for simplicity and time's sake, is a lot of these start with balance, pre-emergence, about 4 ounces. And then the two I like to focus on is coming back with Caprino, and then tank mix in harness glyphosate atrazine, rates to the right there, versus Laudis harness glyphosate atrazine. Main difference between these, Caprino, that's kind of focusing on the soybean rotation, so a little bit higher rate of atrazine. The Laudis has the 3/8 of a pound of atrazine. This is kind of built for the sugar beet rotation. So kind of our rate structure is pretty focused on water hemp populations in the valley. Good news is we got basically complete control of water hemp no matter how you sliced it and diced it. So I focus on starting, this is just pre-only on the far left of the screen here, still about 90% control. But balance followed by Caprino or Laudis or just those post-emergence products by themselves, pretty close to complete weed control. So that's the good news. And this is on that same population where 1 pound of atrazine alone did jack. So once you mix in the group 27s, get that synergy, and then get some residual control of that harness, we are still seeing the ability to get complete control when we tank mix different effective active ingredients, even though atrazine alone did not give us a whole lot. Picture form just showing what this weed control looked like, non-treated on the left. Just decided to show the balance followed by Caprino, and again, harness glyphosate atrazine in that tank mix in the middle, versus just the post-emergence only on the far right. And so the middle picture is just very clean. So we basically had an overlapping residual type of approach. The far right there, you can see a lot of brown. That's just all the water hemp carcasses. So very dense population, but we were able to get them all. Where this became a little bit of an issue, and I'll show some yield data here coming up, is that early season competition from water hemp. And so one of the other reasons we like to see pre followed by post program, besides the fact it's kind of more sound when we talk about herbicide resistance management, is corn is one of our crops that's actually kind of wimpy early on in the season. So we came back about V3 to V4 is when we applied our post-emergence programs. I didn't have time to kind of show a statewide trial, but statewide, when we let weeds compete with corn, we see this inflection point about V3. That V3 and later, we start losing yield. For us, the early season competition from weeds didn't matter as much V1, V2 growth stages compared to some southern states. But non-treated on the left, that pre followed by post in the middle. On the far right is Caprino glyphosate atrazine, that total post program. Point this out because we try our best to have the same picture angle every time we take pictures. Not perfect, but if you look at the far right, we see daylight above that total post program, whereas we don't see that within that middle where we had a pre followed by post. Looking at yield, we did see some yield loss in the post program only. So if I look at something like balance followed by Laudis and that tank mixture with Laudis, 211 bushels, we lost about 35, whatever that math is, when we had the total post program of just Laudis harness glyphosate atrazine. So showing even though we got complete control on this population with metabolic resistance to atrazine, we lost yield due to that early season competition. And pigweeds, water hemp, of course, being a pigweed, very efficient accumulators of nitrogen. So using up a lot of the nitrogen that we're pouring onto that corn crop. That's probably the fastest I've gone through 45 slides. So I almost want to get out of here too. So I want to point out, for those who listen to podcasts, I've got one. So War Against Weeds, always just like to promote it if you're driving around. We're up to probably 150 episodes now. So if you're just jumping in, we are trying to make a table of contents to make it a little bit more appetizing, to try and pick something you want to listen to. Otherwise, we've been going for about 5 or 6 years now. Weed Control Guide, everyone here in person has some physical copies. If you'd like the electronic version, either Google NDSU Weed Control Guide, or the QR code on this screen brings you straight to it.